Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. The police began a high-profile operation to persuade Muslim women to stop their children going to Syria earlier today. It's the latest in a series of controversial moves by the government targeted at the Muslim community. Last weekend, the head of the Charities Commission, neoconservative William Shawcross, told the Sunday Times that the Commission was looking to take action against charities sending money to various groups in Syria. And this came in the wake of Education Secretary Michael Gove's decision to appoint Peter Clark, the former head of counter-terrorism, to investigate claims of Islamic extremism in 25 Birmingham schools. Clark himself is also a member of the board of the Charities Commission. The UK is the second largest contributor to relief aid in Syria. However, there have been many charges made by the media and now by Shawcross that the relief is being used as a front for extremist activities. So what is the reality on the ground, and what do charities themselves feel about the accusations levelled at them? Joining me in the studio to discuss this is Mohammed Amin of the Conservative Muslim Forum, Masood Sajara, Chairman of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and Abdurrahman Sharif, Operations Manager of the Muslim Charities Forum. On Skype, we're joined from Hatay province in Turkey by Faid Al-Dari, who's Deputy Chairman of the Turkish and Syrian operations for Hand in Hand for Syria. Welcome to you all. Abdurrahman, let me start with you. What do you think is the reality, rather than what we're being told in the press, what is the reality of the situation on the ground in terms of charities and the so-called threat of extremism?
Well, I have to say that in terms of the charities that we represent and the overall humanitarian community, this is, I would say that the charities will work in an environment where they have regulations and internal procedures in place. Every time they work in difficult contexts, conflict areas, they take risk assessment measures. That means being careful of where you work, who you work with, and what resources do you use to work with. So amongst the largest amount of the people that represent the humanitarian committee, there are measures in place to tackle any of the issues that the chairman of the Charity Commission mentioned. And I have to add actually that we've been dealing with these questions and issues for a number of years now. And what we found is that although there are allegations that actually charities may be vulnerable to abuse, there has been no evidence to say so. I'm quoting actually the UN rapporteur on freedom of expression who came to the UK in the January 2013, and published a report saying actually that allegations that people have made have been more damaging to the charity sector than actually fruitful in that sense. Because even if they may be one or two charities who commit a mistake, is it fair to actually accuse the whole sector in the UK that represents 180,000 charities for mistakes that one or two do? We found evidence actually when we're looking at the counterterrorism regulation and its impact on non-profit organizations that actually out of the many investigations made, there's been only cases of 2 charities that were closed. And one of them was related to the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. So the question is actually, that doesn't mean actually that there may be weaknesses in some charities or not, but those weaknesses are there to be addressed in terms of government, governance, fundraising, finance, and complying in the best way possible with the Charity Commission.
Okay, well, let me just see if I can bring directly Fadi Al-Dari in, because you're there on the ground. When you hear charges like this made, does it square at all with your direct experience?
It's a shame because I joined my friend Abdurrahman here. We're not saying any of this. I mean, we need to bear in mind there are more than 10 million IDPs inside Syria. They are receiving aid, so obviously the aid is reaching. I mean, I think the report is a bit generalizing. It's just like accusing everyone who's helping in Syria, maybe. That's the way we took it. But definitely, I mean, like charities like Hand in Hand for Syria and others helping inside Syria, we are delivering ourselves. We are ensuring the monitoring and evaluation. We are the implementing partners for so many big INGOs, and they are happy with the work. So it doesn't mean that everyone who's working in Syria are supporting some sort of groups, one group or another. But I mean, obviously, as Brother Abdurrahman said, there might be somebody making a mistake, 1 or 2 charities making a mistake, but it doesn't mean everyone is doing it.
Mohammed, I mean, well, what do you think the head of the Charities Commission is up to now? I mean, he was appointed very controversially by Francis Maud, so it's straight out of the Cabinet Office. This is his first public statement. It's not a good start, is it?
Well, I think this is something we can all agree on. All of us believe, all of us, that money raised by charities should be spent on genuine relief in places like Syria and elsewhere in the world. All of us are agreed that this money should not be diverted to funding the conflict, regardless of whether you support one side or the other. And it's important, therefore, for charities to have good procedures in place to ensure that the money is spent properly, and for those procedures to be properly audited. As to the question of whether there is a problem on the ground or not, I don't know. That's what investigations are about. That's what audits are about. But I'm sure we can all agree on the principle.
Masood, do you think that there is a case to answer here, or is it that there's somebody crying "stop thief" and there's no robbery going on?
Well, the reality is you have to look at the whole lot of things. Like the report on tackling extremism talks about using Charity Commission, even sort of at the universities, and using it on so-called prevent and anti-terrorism. The reality is that, yes, of course, we don't want money to be diverted from charities into something else, but even government's aid gets diverted into other things, And really, the reality is that when you're dealing with that sort of crisis situation, you're not going to be able to actually have a certificate policing, and some will be diverted. And if you really want to stop misuse of funds going to extremists, then stop Saudi Arabia, stop our own government funding and arming groups over there, rather than charities who are actually working very hard on a basis of compassion, to be compassionable at the time that ordinary citizens in those regions are suffering tremendously, to try to actually turn that tap off on accusation. And indeed, there's nothing wrong with investigation. But for them to announce such a thing is actually very damaging. It's very targeted, and there is a double standard. I remember at the time of attack on the Gaza by Israelis, there was adverts in the Jewish Chronicle raising funds for the Israeli Defense Force by charities. We complained, and all the Charity Commission did, they give a whitewash, and at the end, they turned around and said they have not promised to use the money for something else. How can you raise money for one thing and then use it for something else and get a clean bill of health? Muslim charities, Interpol and others have been targeted basically by the Zionists and Zionist infrastructure and the Board of Deputies. And now we've got an appointment of the members of Board of Deputies onto the Charity Commission. This is actually setting up the scene to sort of, yet again, demonize and criminalize the Muslim community out of the standards from the norm.
Okay, well, we'll come back in the second part, actually, to a little bit more about what's been happening at the Charities Commission, because it is an interesting story. But Abdurrahman, do you think that one of the points that Masood made there is correct, in the sense that you can't really, even if you were to have an investigation, even if we all agree that an investigation is a good idea, not kind of simply signalling out one area of work for investigation when it isn't being done across the board, do you think that the point that Masood makes is correct, that really you can't look on delivering aid in a war zone, in a civil war zone, in quite the same way that you would audit the local Oxfam shop in your high street?
Yeah, it's very challenging situations. Every day you worry about your staff, the people who work with you, what will happen the next day. But at the end of the day, what we say is there are principles that are enshrined in the humanitarian charter and humanitarian law that we say, humanitarian aid should be independent, impartial, and neutral, right? And that means that you have to help as much as possible anyone that is in need. He's on the wrong side or on the good side. And this was a mechanism that was established by the International Committee of the Red Cross when there was a battle in Solferino, actually. And someone said, we have to help the wounded, from both sides. So when you have situations where politics get involved, the humanitarian community tries as much as possible to stay away from it, even though sometimes it's challenging, right? But the principle is that if you don't help, right, then people will die and keep on dying So the question is, do you let them keep dying, or do you do something and intervene?
Fadi, how much contact does your organisation actually have with the Charities Commission? How much direct oversight is there on a day-to-day basis? And so would you expect that if there's going to be the kind of initiative that William Shawcross has talked about, that suddenly these guys are going to turn up doing things and saying things and being around in a way that they haven't been in the past?
To be honest, we're quite happy with, I mean, we cooperate with anyone. I mean, if they want to visit us, I mean, that's fine, by all means. We are monitoring our work, and our work is being monitored on the ground. I mean, our books are open. I mean, we tend to help everyone on the ground. Our aim is, we are a humanitarian agency. We have 7 hospitals on the ground. They are open for everyone. And as my colleague said, it's a war zone, so people need to bear it in mind as well when it comes to the reporting side. So we report properly. It does take time, but at the end of the day, we do get it.
Do you think that there's something else going on here in this sense, that for a couple of years before last August, when the vote in the House of Commons went against intervening in Syria, we heard very little else from the government, but the rebels are the good guys, these are the people we're backing, we should be arming them, possibly we're going to attack the Assad regime to assist them. And that what happened is that some people in the Muslim community took that seriously, went over there, and now the government's trying to deal with the blowback in a series of ways which, frankly, are problems of its own creation.
I don't think that's at all relevant to the charity issue. Charity money should be spent on feeding people, on helping people who are injured with medical treatment, and frankly, I don't think anybody's going to get excited about whether the people that you're helping with food and medicines are pure civilians or people who were previously engaged in combat. Charity money should not be spent on buying bullets, even for rebels that you actually are supporting.
I guess my point was this, that many people here have said, look, the charities aren't, the accusation isn't accurate. But the problem exists, or it exists to some degree. But what I'm suggesting is that this was something which the government generated, or at least partly generated, out of its own foreign policy stance, up to the point where it fell apart last August.
I don't think the government can be blamed for generating a problem. I mean, the reality is that most people involved in the charity sector genuinely want to help people with food and medicines. There is a risk, and I don't know without investigations how strong this risk is in actuality. There is a risk that people will collect money, purportedly charitable, and use that to buy weapons. That is not right. We need to make sure it doesn't happen. The extent to which it's happening is a matter for investigation. I won't claim to have any knowledge about it, because I don't. But we can all agree on the principles.
But Masood, do you think there's a, in Mohammed saying it's not right, this is spent on weapons, but the government spent 2 years telling us that these were great guys. They were doing a great job, that we ought to, that if not individuals, certainly the British government ought to be shoveling as much aid to them as possible.
And those aids, there are a lot of reports that many of it are actually diverted into arms and unsavory groups. But the reality is that even right now, you read, you go on BBC and you read the documents from the government, the most they say against any opposition group is that they're rebels. They're not identified as a terrorist group. And but if you get in contact with anybody over there, then you become terrorist. This is actually a double standard. And actually, really, in reality, the amount of money that is going from Britain as aid over there is peanuts. We're really talking about peanuts. If any part of that, and I agree, it shouldn't be diverted, but if any part of that is diverted, it really is such a negligible thing that is really not worth the sort of thing that we are getting. The huge amount of money going to those groups for arms and so forth, it's going from Saudis, Qataris, Turkish, and indeed our own government. It's not really aid money being diverted. And I think this is a smokescreen, really, to, on one side, cover the work and the policy of the British government, and on the other side, criminalize and demonize Muslim charities, which actually, by standard, are doing extremely good work.
Well, let me put that point to Abdurrahman, because I mean, anybody who knows anything about the Muslim community in this country knows that it's very deeply involved in charitable work. It's a huge part of, you know, what certainly many, perhaps most observant Muslims would regard as part of what they do. Do you think that the kind of statements that are coming out of the Charity Commission are bound to be taken as a kind of an assault on that entire culture, rather than simply a question of so-called extremism?
Well, there is a fact is that in the past 3 to 4 years, the Charity Commission has received a lot of cuts, right, from governments and so on. And it needs actually more funding to be able to support the charity sector better. And that's something all the charity sector has agreed and highlighted in the past years. The fact is that now this issue of charities and extremism is being used, in a sense, to generate more money for the Charity Commission. And that's actually what we are arguing. That is not right, in a sense.
So your argument is that you know, that counter-terrorism is the kind of, you know, I mean, the thing that can't be assaulted financially inside government, and that's being used as a ramp to fund the organisation. Is that your point?
Well, my point is that the Charity Commission needs more funding to be able to support the charity sector, so that organisations can be better supported in running and so on. They can ask advice.
Because it got hammered by MPs recently, didn't it? It said it wasn't doing its job. I mean, not about
exactly.
this. About
but the reason why I'm saying this is that in 2012 we sent communications to the Charity Commission saying, you know, our charities are concerned about working in Syria and so on, and would like guidances, right? And the response we received was that there was already enough guidance. But the indirect issue is that actually there's no one to produce that type of guidance. There's a lack of resources to be able to support the sector in that sense. And that's what I'm highlighting. In a sense, you have issues that are topical.
You asked for that guidance in
2012.
Fadi, how much contact do you actually have now with the Charities Commission? I mean, I know you were saying earlier our books are open, we're available for discussion, but I mean, on a kind of month-by-month basis, is there contact, or is it something that just happens at kind of end-of-year audit, or not even that much?
Well, to be honest, now we're working through our accounts and the audits. We're going to submit them in the next few days, I would say. They are with the accountant. So I would say we're happy to work with anyone.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get from you, Fadi, is this: at the moment, do you have very much contact with the Charities Commission? Are they on to you on a month-by-month basis, or is it something that you just sort of bang across the books at the end of the year, and that's the only thing you hear from them?
No. They're not on our back. We're only going to submit the account and just wait to hear from them.
So I mean, this does sound rather like an organisation which the MPs themselves said isn't doing its job.
It's not the role of the Charity Commission to actively sit on the backs of 1.5 million, whatever the number is, of charities. The first requirement is to set down clear guidance and procedures. It's important to ensure that these charities are audited. They're not audited by the Charities Commission, they're audited by their own appointed auditors. Each charity appoints its own auditors. The fundamental goal of the Charity Commission is to set out clear guidance and principles which they're seeking to do. And for example...
Do you agree with Abdurrahman's point that basically, though, it isn't... Well, not only Abdurrahman's point, but I mean, he made the point, MPs have made the point, Public Affairs Commission made the point that this organisation isn't working.
I wouldn't accept that. I mean, clearly the Charity Commission, like every other part of the public sector, has had to have its budgets cut because as a country we were spending far too much money. And when you cut, sometimes it's hard and painful in every sector. But I believe the Charity Commission can run effectively. I think that's the goal of the chairman and the rest of the board. And they pointed out areas where the law is deficient. At the moment, for example, you can be a convicted terrorist or a convicted paedophile, and that does not automatically disqualify you from being a charity trustee. Clearly, that's the kind of area where the law needs to change, and that's one of the things that the Charity Commission has pointed out.
Masood, what do you think the impact of this will be on the sort of general notion of charity among the Muslim community?
Yeah, Muslim community is very charitable, and it's sort of it is inherent in our culture and in our religion, and we have been commanded to do so. But I'm quite concerned, not just for the fact, the reality that the Charity Commission is underfunded and not fit for purpose, and there needs to be tremendous change within it, and finances is one of them. I'm also concerned that is now not only is not able to do what it's supposed to do, we are putting extra demand that is going to become part of the prevent, part of the anti-terrorism, and it's really moving away from its real role of actually doing and making sure the charities run according to certain standards. And there's a double standard here. I actually explained. You know, on one side we had Interpol investigated for 2-3 years, all the bank accounts and everything closed and everything, and it was being clean bill of health. And then, you know, a Zionist charity openly and publicly raising money for armed forces, and nothing is being done about it. If we have a standard, those standards needs to be implemented. Charity Commission should not become yet again another institution which is going to demonize and become part of the anti-terror structure. This is not its purpose. And I think I'm afraid that, you know, when you read the documentation with regard to prevent and regard to sort of tackling extremism and the statements that are coming out and the new appointments like Clark, you see that that is the direction the government is pushing it.
Okay. Just let me have a final word from Fadi. If you had a message to the Charities Commission in terms of something you'd want to say to them to make your work easier, what would it be?
We want clear guidelines, to be honest. I mean, we've been operating in Syria for the last 3 years. We've been like following our instincts, and then we've been monitoring it's like all the guidelines you want is on the Charity Commission website. But is it? So we keep looking, and now they're starting to give us more guidelines. Now we're starting to meet with them, so to understand more. But I mean, the requirement in Syria, you can't just put people and get signatures, for example, that easily. There is some sort of, you would need to document and monitor. So the monitoring is not as easy as in like a earthquake zone. It's not like in a flood zone. So we need to know the clear guidelines and what we are required to do in this environment.
OK, well, on that point, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it for this half of the discussion. But after the break, we'll be looking in more depth at the appointments at the Charities Commission and how it's working. So do rejoin us after the ads.